Alright, so as you might know, I'm a big fan of premium Cardfight Vanguard, and it may also surprise you to know that I do in fact indulge in the standard format from time to time as well. I do enjoy that as well to the degree I can, though not as much as the premium format. And today, our video topic is going to be mainly focused on standard. So today we're going to be talking about one of the main issues I've seen personally I've seen creeping up on the standard format for a while now in Cardfight Vanguard. TLDR, for those who are in a hurry at the moment, the main issue I'm going to be talking about today is the drop zone and how it's becoming overutilized within the game. So most players within Vanguard community will have encountered Granblue at some point. Its main theme is calling, milling, counting cards in the drop zone, all of that stuff. It's very, very clear and obvious. They are, of course, mostly undead units in appearance. Generally anyone who's played against it or plays it will characterize the clan as having a focus on the drop zone as the clan's main theme. And what today's video is going to focus on is the ability to utilize the drop zone, as I said earlier. So it's going to be a sort of a short form video essay style thing. It's the first time I've done one of these properly in a while, so excuse my stuttering while I go through. So anyhow, so what about the drop zone is important at the moment? So it symbolizes that a unit is no longer usable in most cases. So once a unit hits the drop zone, it stays there for the rest of the game. Although in some cases it can be recycled back to the deck or other locations, or go to the bind zone for example, but rarely is it ever returned straight to the field or hand. This is important due to making your resources limited, and because they become limited, because you can't use them once they've hit the drop zone, they become more valuable because of the limitations. So both you, and as a target for your opponent, this makes your units more valuable, because now if they're retired, you don't get them back. So that also adds some counterplay options and thought processes into how cards are used and played, because you know once it's gone, it's gone. You can't use it again unless you have another copy of it in hand or have a way to recycle it. So having an inaccessible location for cards to end up in is important for balancing the game itself, and that's partly why we have places like the bind zone as well, is so that it location that's supposedly even more inaccessible, which is a bit of a weird thing. It's sort of like a second drop zone. But anyhow, now in general, this theme is very rarely themes have very rarely overlapped within clans. Okay, so within the past of Cardfight Vanguard, generally each clan has their own theme. It very rarely overlaps. Okay, and if and when it does, it's often only a single card or so, along those lines, that often does not have a large enough impact to be focused upon as a major issue within the game. So any Yu-Gi-Oh players amongst you may think that this is odd, as in games such as Yu-Gi-Oh, the ability to call from their graveyard, or special summon from their graveyard I guess, is a very common ability that appears in most decks, and it's generally very accessible for anyone who wants to put it in their deck, because there are cards that you can just put in the deck. So, but Vanguard, unlike Yu-Gi-Oh, does not allow for the overlapping of clans within the main formats. You can't have the same clans within the same deck. So this is an interaction of the game that each clan has its own playstyle and theme that generally do not overlap with each other, providing a unique playstyle to each and every clan. Granblue is allowed the unique playstyle of manipulating and calling from the drop zone. Some other clans do come close to, such as Shadow Paladin with their ritual-like playstyle, counting grade 1s in their drop zone, but they generally do not call from the drop zone. So recycling of materials back to deck from drop zone is one of the more common sort of things among clans that is more, seen within other clans. But it usually takes multiple steps to perform this sort of thing, and multiple steps if you want to use skills in a way to perform the same sort of result as Granblue of returning a card to deck and then calling it to field or putting it back into your hand from deck again. So Granblue has the unique ability, or should have the unique ability, to just yeet something from their drop zone straight onto their board or into their hand. And that's generally how they've always been played and how they've been seen, and that's their theme. So these themes were carried on from Vanguard G in the reboot of the series, in the creation of the V-Series format for Cardfight Vanguard. But of recent, in Standard, the lines have felt more and more skewed to me, like there are issues arising from the card design. But to look at that, we're going to have to go back through some of the history of Standard first. So I believe we will start early on with the first booster set of the so V-Series just released. The first booster set of V-Series Cardfight Vanguard is dropped on May 25th 2018 in Japan, or June 22nd for the English release in the same year, bringing us our first look at clan setups with the VBT01 Unite Team Q4. This set shows how they are fleshing out playstyles right out of the gate and allowing for the specialization of clans and unique playstyles to go along with the new imaginary gift system. This is of course our first look because it's the start of V-Series, so they have a lot to show. And as we go forward into the new sets, the release and releases, we start to see more and more clans added to the bunch with more and more new unique playstyles, so that can attract different players. Predictably, soon enough, we have the release of VB02, Champions of the Asia Circuit, on July 20th, 2018 in Japan, or August 31st, 2018 in the English edition. And it's an extra booster, bringing Granblue's signature playstyle back with the clan itself. So there you have the drop zone manipulation, with several units allowing for selective cooling of units from the drop zone, as well as generally milling as well to fill their drop zone fast. All is going pretty well for each clan so far, so each clan is sticking to their own guns, Aquaforce based on the number of attacks they're making, Granblue based on the drop zone, Royal Paladins based on Blaster Blade, because they don't have any other things unique. Excuse me, Royal Paladin players, I'm sorry, I just want to take the mick out of you. But in general, everyone's sticking to their guns and their own playstyle, okay? So we come to one of our first incidents shortly afterwards. So please excuse me if I've got this card wrong, as it may not be the first instance, but it's the first instance I can think of and can find outside of Granblue of a card being able to place from the drop zone onto the field again. And that is in VBT03, Miyagi Academy's Cardfight Club, released on December 14th, 2018 in Japan, or February 15th, 2019 in English. And this unit was Narukami's Rising Phoenix. Rising Phoenix is a very simple card where it allows itself to be flung on from the drop zone onto the field again whenever you bind an opponent's unit during your turn, with a small power boost. So I don't really see this unit as a key issue, because while it does allow multi-attacking, it only revives that unit. That unit is the only one that can revive. There's no other units revived. It's not selecting any unit you choose, it's just that unit. And it does play to the playstyle of Narukami, as it requires a unit to be bound to perform this effect. So it becomes a nice addition, didn't take over any of the clan's identity at all. It's not till much later that the drop zone issue started to really take shape. So if we cut ahead, we get to Vilus Deleter, VBT04 in January 25th, 2019 in Japan, or March 22nd in English. We start to see hailing deleters with a tag team with each other from the drop, which generally I don't find as much of a problem, because it was more of an interesting small playstyle. They're not really played, they're not key to the playstyle of the clan, they were just like a nice addition. More importantly in that set, we had the Shirayuki lineup, and that stands out a little more as an indication of where the drop zone manipulation was heading. While it produces an effective engine that allows the recycling of Shirayuki from the drop zone to hand, as Shirayuki's defensive abilities allowed for Murakumo's a greater diversity in deck builds and strength, this recycling of materials is partially based on the opponent's response to attacks, and it could be controlled somewhat, giving them options to allow the recycle or not, generally based on whether they allow themselves to get hit or not, though of course that comes with limitations. So there is still a degree to which the opponent can be rewarded for counterplaying this, and also Shirayuki is a bit different, as it's always bouncing from drop to hand. It's very rarely that you retire Shirayuki from field and then they add it back to their field, so add it back to their hand. So it's more of a defensive card than an offensive one, though of course the Shirayuki can perform a very offensive turn by dropping you below 0 in numbers. But eventually Shirayuki was limited within the standard format after becoming a powerful engine that could easily be run within other Murakumo themes such as Hyuga. Hence the issue of recycling became a lot less prevalent because they were only allowed to 1-1. But this still took a long time to come into effect after the deck was slaughtering generally most of the other people on the competitive scene at that point. So if we move along a little, where I feel the problem really started to take shape was in the release of VBT06 Phantasmal Steed Restoration in August 10th, 2019 in Japan, September 27th, 2019 in English, where we really start to see the snowball in this issue, because in this set we received Mordred Phantom playstyle, and the card Transient Revenger Masquerade. So it starts to show more of an issue here, as it allows the recycling of Blaster Dark, similar to Shirayuki, but instead of adding to hand it places it onto the field. And while it's only a single target, so it only works on Blaster Dark is also one of the most crucial pieces in the Mordred deck, because it's the card that gets restood by Mordred swings, it's the card that lets Mordred gain force markers, so unless you're removing them completely, like binding them or spinning them back to deck, the issue starts to show, because it's crucial to remove the Blaster Dark in the matchup. But the problem comes down to, even when you remove the Blaster Dark by retire or attack, it just gets placed back onto the field by the effect of Masquerade. And this largely negates the existence of counterplay, as simple removal just no longer has its purpose because it will just come back anyhow. If they have any masquerades, they don't have to limit how often they use their Blaster Darks, as they're able to just quickly throw them back onto the field. They don't have to think as much, because when there's only 4 Blaster Darks, you now have to think, how am I going to use them? Though, but unfortunately the existence of Masquerade effectively removes the need to think as much about that, and so there's very little reward as well for removing the Blaster Darks, because you know they'll just come back and then gain another force marker. So it becomes rather an issue. Personally, I believe this is where the issue really starts to become apparent in the card design, because from this point on we start to see a lot more cards allowing drop zone manipulation or calling from drop. So we'll move on to VEB 11, so the Extra Booster 11, Crystal Melody, which was released in December 20th, 2019 in Japan, and January 31st, 2020 in English. And while most were focused on the absurdity of the release that was Riviera at the time, later errata to be hard once returned, thank God, going mostly unnoticed, we also received Aurora Star Coral. And Coral brings with it the ability to selectively take any card from the drop zone and place it into hand. This skill exists in a similar function to Granblue's Greed Shade, but Coral effectively utilises the skill better and generates advantage every turn, while Greed Shade only allows a swap of materials, as you have to discard a card to add one to hand. And of course, while this is the first Vanguard unit with a viable drop zone to hand based skill without specific targets, it's a Bermuda unit, and of course Bermuda Triangle is well known for crossing the lines of clan playstyles, and it's hard not to do so with such large waves of support every year, but this is only the first sign of what's to come, really. So 2020 hits, and we get the release of VEB 13, the Astral Force, on February 21st Japan and April 3rd in English. We received the first Grade 3 Vanguard outside of Granblue that actively calls from the drop zone, with Angel Feather's newest Vanguard unit arc, Ada Marketh Melketh. With the skill to self-damage as a cost, and calling 3 units at once from your drop zone. This is a skill with an Angel Feather that is wholly unexpected at the time, as usually we were assuming that it was going to be calling from damage zone, as that has been their main focus ever since, but way before V-Series was a thing. I also want to note that being able to call 3 from drop zone on your first ride is something that Granblue can't even do with one Vanguard skill, as they are only able to call 2 from drop zone at a time on their first Vanguard ride, unless they somehow manage to soul charge a Grade 3, which I believe is difficult for them at the very least. So while this is mainly for the plot line within the V-Series anime and the Cinnamon arc, it makes effective use of the other support within the set, so its general support is also based around the idea of being called revived from the drop zone repeatedly. As there's many units that retire itself on attack to gain bonus effects at the end of the battle. And there was also the Protect 2 support that arrived in that set, which of course becomes beneficial if you're able to keep placing them onto the field, onto Protect 2 markers, so that you can keep intercepting and then placing them back on the field the next turn. Although the ability proves very powerful and versatile, Angel Feather at this point still lacks a lot of powerful rear guards to use its skills with, and the cost of dealing self damage each turn to perform can be argued as incredibly large, despite the ability to heal on ride, and also it does somewhat play into their playstyle of self-damage and manipulating the damage zone. So this again removes counterplay from the opponents, as selective targeting of units for removal, either by battle or effect, in most cases becomes less attractive because they'll just be right back the next turn, or effectively pointless outside of removing potential guard options, as of course the one thing you will get is that you have to wait, it'll only become a problem during their next turn. So if per se they have a protect unit on Protect 2 that you can remove, then it can be quite useful to just remove it right there, and then there's one less intercept to worry about. So that kind of retire does become effective, but most decks don't have that ability. So this is what leads, in my opinion, to the creation of several units down the line that severely delve too far into the concept of calling from drop zone outside of Granblue. So the floodgates are now fully open for the design team, as they've now crossed that line once, and there's very little fear in doing it again. So we now, very shortly afterwards, get Ariel Divine Knight Altmile in the next release of VEB 14, the next stage, in April 10th in Japan 2020, or July 10th in English, allowing for Royal Paladins to call from both deck and drop zone. This of course allows royals to run low numbers of key units with powerful rearguard effects, as they will always be able to fish them out of their drop zone if they're ever retired outside of very specific scenarios where the bind zone is used or they don't have counterblast because they've misvalued their effective resources. This leads to the frustrating position where removing these select strong rearguards such as Starlight Violinist net almost no result during the next turn, as they will appear right back where they were on field. Again, removing Starlight Violinist, for example, does remove the back row's ability to intercept for a turn, but they'll just return back for the offensive turn. It effectively has very little impact. So although removing these units does gain a temporary benefit, they don't yield significant long-term results, or much thought in the actions of the person playing Altmile on how they use their resources, as they'll just be able to think, well, I'll just plop it back on the field next turn. I don't need to worry about calculating whether to throw things down or not. So this is a contributing factor to why I feel standard format is still largely not as interesting to play as the G format, since your decisions start to mean a lot less in cases such as this. So the Majesty Law Blaster special deck set released in May 22nd, 2020 in Japan, or in English October 2nd, shortly after this, features Darkall Trumpeter, allowing for the recycle of multiple valuable resources again, with adding Blaster Blade and the Order card to hand, or just one of the Blaster twins to hand. Well, anything with Blaster, I believe, actually. Yeah, anything with Blaster. So helping the deck and now the deck doesn't have to worry so much about how it's using its resources on a bigger scale, and it's lowering the impact of resource removal, although, of course, one of the main engine parts of the deck removing the engine part of the deck is far less impactful, as generally once they've done it once, it's permanent with the attack gain and the crit gain, but they do still have to use up large numbers of resources if they want to use the skill to generate more gift markers. So recycling some of that can be helpful towards managing resources, so they have to think less about how they're throwing things onto the board. So now I think another main offender appears shortly afterwards in VBT 08. Silver Dust Blaze, released on June 19th, Japan, or September 4th in English. This card design of Link Joker within this is almost nonsensical in several areas. So we get the release of Alter Ego Messiah. And he's a top offender in this case, as the unit allows cards from drop zone to be placed onto field as locked, and by use of its attack ability or other cards such as the Order card, Clear Frame, Whirling Wash of Curse Cleansing, locked cards become unlocked and usable, as this is the main playstyle of the deck, allowing for multi-attack and use of resources that are locked. So while once again the revival of units, because it can revive 2 units a turn effectively by this skill, makes the removal of the deck's rear guards from the field drop zone largely pointless if they are removed to stop offensive options next turn, because they will just be placed back on the field, effectively cutting off any reason to counterplay via destruction of rear guards outside of full board wipes, which at least might force them to call more cards from hand, as to have a larger field, because they can only revive 2 at once, but that's still 2 at once is quite a large amount. And it also leads to the other extremely confusing card design in my personal opinion, which is showcased by the grade 4 unit Genesis Machine Deity Volkogode. This unit is a 30k base power and cannot be ridden or called. It's designed with the intention of being placed as lock and then unlocked and then swing for large power. So I fail to understand why it must have a 30k base, as removing the unit via battle is rendered largely pointless due to Alter Ego's Messiah skills to just place it from drop zone next turn. I'd understand more if the unit was a 15k base, like other grade 4s, and gains 15k power during your turn, but I assume the design of the 30k base would make it stand out as a grade 4 unit. Still, I find the purpose of making it hard to remove via battle does not hold much weight when it is in consideration of Alter Ego Messiah being printed in the very same set. So, aside from this strange design, it once again puts little value on removal options outside of spinning to deck or bind, where it can counterplay much less viable or meaningful in the matchup, which of course then goes inherently and reduces the interest of the matchup. So it becomes a lot more linear, straightforward, because they don't have to think much about how they're playing their cards or resources, because they'll just be placed back on the field straight afterwards. So seemingly every set since Astral Force at this point seems to violate the drop zone casually at this point. So next we come to BBT 09, Butterfly Demon Knight, July 31st, 2020 in Japan, or October 2nd in English. And it's the first set in a long while to contain Granblue. Hooray! And now we've finally got more cards that use the drop zone from Granblue. And it finally allows them to use a decent multi-attack in battle phase by calling things from drop with the skill of Night Rose. But that's not the main issue with this set. The main issue with this set is within the very same set we received Yasui. and Yasui in Murakumo, and they practically play like a Granblue clan. Except it's an Axel clan. So it largely devalues Granblue's playstyle as a clan, being able to procure units back from the drop zone regularly with both Yasui's grade 3s, as well as even their new grade 1 Wisteria, Flower, Stealth Rogue, Takehime. Most importantly, they have gained the ability to ride from the drop zone mid-battle. This is a skill that not even the drop zone-based clan itself has the ability to do yet, while they do have a card which allows them to ride from drop zone during the main phase if your opponent is grade 3. They do not have the ability to ride during the battle phase yet. So, as far as I can tell, whilst they can ride from drop zone earlier on, they can't do this mid-battle thing. As well, many Murakumo playstyles are based on having units with the same name on the field. This used to be both a strength and a weakness for the clan, as you can remove units and drastically lower the strength of the field that they have in the coming turn, as the number of units with the same name drops, and it becomes more difficult to access them again because they're now in the drop zone. But while Hyuga bypassed this ability partially, Hyuga still has limitations on the resources that it's using, as you only have so many cards that you can call from deck. Meanwhile, Yasui fully bypasses this issue by allowing large access to the drop zone, along with having the space for units to be placed with Axel markers. And finally, it just does what Granblue does better at this point. So, finally, the most recent offender may not seem particularly egregious to most people, as it's just a singular card, but it is also fundamentally a large issue in terms of card design for me, and is a large degradation of the clan playstyle of Granblue, and that is in the set VBT 10 Phantom Dragon's Aeon, released in August 28th for Japan 2020, or October 30th in English. We received Shadow Paladin support for the Luard subclan, and amongst them was the grade 2 unit Morfessa. This unit might not seem like too much that was special outside of its high rarity value with the ASRs, and so it has a skill that makes itself grade 1 on field or in deck, but second skill I feel that is greatly overstepping the bounds in card design is the ability to retire itself and call the unit from drop zone after it attacks. So why is this card design a problem? This card is doing what Granblue as a clan are meant to do, but better. In the same ways that Murakumo are also performing Granblue's style better than them in many aspects. So because it has multi-attack using the drop zone on rearguard before the clan is literally based around the drop zone, I see a large issue with this. Yes, there's Night Rose, but she's a Vanguard only skill, yet they still don't have a rearguard in Granblue that is able to call from drop zone mid-battle, and Shadow Paladin do. I feel like this is an overstep of card design boundaries and really needs to be thought about in future design, especially with Granblue in mind. And this is clearly a disservice to the theme of Granblue and is starting to really skew the lines between clans. So in the past, one of the main complaints I used to hear about Vanguard G was that every clan did the same thing. And whilst in some cases this was very arguable and potentially true, they generally did the same things such as multi-attack, but using unique methods to perform the multi-attacks. So whether it was calling from deck, calling from drop zone, or just restanding their units by their effects in the middle of the battle, so they could effectively get the same result using different paths and playstyles and conditions to reach them. So that was at least somewhat interesting and skewed the clan lines at least somewhat. But I don't see this worrying development in standard currently being discussed as much in the current Vanguard community, and the blurring of the lines further than ever before in many cases such as this. Like, we really didn't have cards that were resurrecting cards from the drop zone as frequently as we do now, and the real question to ask is, where does this stop? How long before we have an order card, for example, comparable to Monster Reborn in Yu-Gi-Oh? Will we get that, given every clan the ability to freely access their drop zone, decreasing the value of retire and battle removal, or rear guards, or even costs paid for skills that involve discard or retire? I hope not. In many cases, I hope not. While it might not be universally used, it just continues to devalue the playstyle of Granblue even further. And I really hope that this small dive into the issue of the drop zone has at least been somewhat informative and enjoyable to listen to. If you want more content like this in future, or want to be around when I finally get some of my other products done, such as the animation I'm working on at the moment, the subscribe button is literally right there under the video. You don't have to call it back from the drop zone to click or anything. You can just click it right there. And if I've missed things or points of your own that you think should be made, please go for it in the comment section. Just try to be polite about it. And as always, Have a nice day. Ah, come on!